Unfortunately, with book bannings and curriculum changes, I don't know that anyone is going to teach my children anything about their Black selves, coming forward if it's not me and it's not their community. Then my job becomes as this liaison or this intermediary to write us back into the history of this country. And so that no matter how many times they try to erase us, they just find more and more evidence that we were here.
My name is Linda Lorelle, and I'm asking you to have the courage to listen with an open mind to all of our voices, because our voices matter. Hey everybody, it's Linda Lorelle, and this is Our Voices Matter. Thanks so much for joining us for this special series we're doing called Across the Generations, where we amplify the voices of Gen Z and millennials. So excited for you to meet today's guest. She is Houston's first Black poet laureate. She's a writer, a librettist, educator, activist, author, performer. In fact, was ranked the number 2 best female performance poet in the world. She plays classical piano. She's a singer. She's an actress. In short, she is a storyteller extraordinaire whose words speak to the very core of our humanity. Remember her name. She is destined for greatness. Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton. Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton, it is such an honor and a pleasure to finally have you on the podcast. I've been wanting to do this for a long time, and I am so glad we finally have made it happen. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Just kind of riding the vibe of everything that's happening right now.
Oh, my goodness. I have to say, I've been having such a good time, doing research and learning even more about you than I already knew. And I just read this terrific quote from Jasmine Barnes, the composer that you worked with on Plum Sugar. And we're going to talk about Plum Sugar. But here's what she said. Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton is going to be famous.
She did say that. And I looked at her and she's like, I'm serious, sis.
She's serious. And I echo that. I completely 150% agree with her. So, okay, let's jump in. And I want you to tell our audience how you describe what you do, because you are so multifaceted, multi-talented, and you've got fingers in so many different areas. And talents in all of those areas. So how do you describe what you do?
I like to say that I'm a multi-genre literary artist. I think that that's kind of like covers it all. It means I can do a lot of things, but my medium, I would say as an artist, is words. So, while other people pick, paint or something else, if it has text, I am probably in love with it. So anything from opera, libretti, to plays, to books, to poems, to performing myself on stage and my work on stage, all of those things for me just kind of give me life and are my purpose on this earth.
Where do you think this stems from? Where does your love of words come from?
I think it comes a little bit from my parents, probably more than a little bit from my parents. Growing up, my mom had so many libraries in every room, and we were voracious readers. My dad would read to me at night. My mom would homeschool me. So we constantly had a flow of books coming in or going to field trips in libraries. That kind of love for storytelling, I think, is something that I've always loved. And so growing up, I see it now in my kids as well, as they start to tell a lot of stories even before they can write. But I think taking to the medium of writing, my mom used to say I carried a spiral notebook around with me like kids carry stuffed animals. And I would just doodle and write and read buildings, and words just have always intrigued me in that way.
When did you realize that you could make this your life's work? Because what you're doing, especially in so many different genres, it's not something that little Black girls grew up seeing. So you are blazing a bunch of trails. So when did you start to think, this might be my life's work, and how can I make this happen?
It kind of comes twofold for me. I've only been a full-time artist for a little over a year, but I have been working for over a decade. And so I think at one point in time, I thought kind of what the narrative that's told to us is that if you're going to be an artist, you're going to starve, you're going to have to do your art while you work a 9-to-5, which in a lot of situations is the truth for a lot of people. And I don't want to put that down, but I just felt like there had to be more than that. And so I was in the education space and the nonprofit space for a long time. I loved working with young readers and young writers. I still love doing those things, and I lead a lot of community workshops to kind of fulfill that itch. But there came a point, I think, right around beginning of 2020, before the world collapsed, where I debuted my first opera, Marian Song, with Houston Grand Opera. And there was just something about other people getting on stage and doing the work. And then I was sitting at an after party one day, and one of the singers said to me, in the 20 years of my operatic career, I've never walked into a room with more than one other person who looked like me. And the work that you created made me feel seen, and I've never felt myself this much in a room. And I just thought to myself, if I could make that happen for people, why would I stop? Why wouldn't I do that everywhere in every way that I could? And so the work started to transcend beyond just now my self-expression and, my need to tell a story, to this other thing that could tap into making room for people that were, felt invisible and felt unseen. And so I think that's really what got me into saying, yeah, this is it. I'm going to go full steam, and we're going to see where it takes me.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that this trajectory kind of started when you became Houston's first Black and I believe youngest poet laureate, which you held that title for 2 years. So tell us what that means, first of all, to be a poet laureate, for those who don't know. And then how did that basically become a launch pad for where you are now?
Absolutely. I think there's one younger than me, Outspoken Bean, who's the current poet laureate.
Right.
He's a few years younger than me.
Yeah.
A friend of mine. But poet laureate, how I described it to people was kind of twofold. One way is I'm an ambassador of poetry for the city of Houston. And for people who are like, I still don't get it, I say I'm the mayor's poetic hype man, right? That's kind of what I got to do for 2 years. And so when there was park openings or large events, I would come and kind of do a poem instead of a prayer, kind of in that manner of dedicating a space or setting the mode of a space and the feeling and the mood of what we wanted to be in. But I also got to collaborate with some really great people like the Houston Rockets and the Houston Ballet and the Houston Grand Opera to create work that highlighted new stories and stories that they kind of knew, but wanted to put some new emphasis on, like Marian Anderson's career, And I also got to build a workshop series for women and for youth that dove into mental health and how we tap into using writing as art therapy. And so it really is thinking about, how do I make the written text, the read text, a space for community to plug into the city? And that's what that role does.
Yeah. So Hurricane Harvey played a huge role in your life, obviously as a Houstonian, as it did for all of us who lived through it. But it also had a role in terms of your career. So explain to our audience what that connection is.
Yeah, I feel selfish sometimes because Harvey was such a devastating force for so many people. And I was grateful to be spared in the damage. We had a little roof leak, but it really exploded me in a great way. And so, there's parts of me that are like, I'm happy for the opportunities that Harvey developed, but I'm not happy about Harvey, right?
Of course.
And so I think it was a day or two after Harvey kind of let up and people started realizing how bad the damage was. We started coming out of our homes. I got a message from BBC World News asking me if I had something to say about the hurricane. And I wondered why they called me, but they said that they had actually gotten a youth poet in Charlotte when one of the hurricanes hit that gave them some really great feedback. So they thought, why not do that in Houston? I couldn't leave my house. The roads were flooded, right? Trees were down. And so they actually brought a camera crew to my home and we filmed a poem in the middle of my neighborhood on the street, getting dirty looks from all of my neighbors because no one knows what I do, right? In my neighborhood. Yeah. But that video went viral and ended up being spread on BBC World News across multiple platforms, definitely turned my name into a household name here in Houston for a long time, just because people were connecting with this message of hope that I was able to craft for the city, and thinking about how we rebuild and we regain, and that this doesn't have to be the end of Houston or of us as people, right? But that we can stand back up again and help each other up to be something better and greater.
That message of hope. You did something similar for another hugely tragic. I don't even want to call it an incident, but a tragic event that happened at Mother Emanuel AME Church in South Carolina back in 2015, when a white supremacist went into a Bible study and brutally murdered 9 people, 8 parishioners, and the pastor. You responded to that in the way that you know how. Can you share with us what you did and how you came to that, to the place where you were able to write it? First, I'm going to tell people you've got to go online and watch it. It's on her website, and it's just breathtaking and brilliant. But talk us through that process and how you were able to share what you did.
Yeah, my mom always says there's something wrong with me. And then she laughs immediately after, because she's like, you can take the most tragic and disturbing things and turn them into these pieces of artwork that, make us all think in new and different ways. And so that's kind of, for me, I think the text has always been also a space of catharsis and of processing, especially things that I can't comprehend. For me, Mother Emanuel sounded so much like 16th Street, right? It sounded so much like the churches that I grew up in. My father was a pastor. And so I constantly being in church, that was the safe space. And so thinking about someone who could come into the safe space and violate it. And what does that look like to sit there and be at Bible study, right? The way that you always are with the people you always were with, and to have this person come in that you seek to welcome, but that means you nothing but harm. And so I just sat down with that. And at the time I was coaching the Houston VIP Poetry Slam team. I was working with another friend of mine, Rayla Crawford, and we were trying to come up with what is a poem that we could actually craft together to champion the voices. I had a good chunk of it written already, and then she kind of came in and we were able to actually do a duet version of it first. And then I took it as a solo and kind of developed out the rest of my thoughts into the version that you see online today. But I think for me, it was thinking about, there is a sound, there is a rhythm, there is so much more than just a text in church that draws us in. And so I wanted to tap into that. I don't call myself a singer, but my friends do. And so thinking about how can I bring in gospel and how can I use my body for music. In slam, we're not allowed to use props or musical instruments. So my body had to become the instrument if I wanted to bring in that. And I just thought about, what is foot stomping? What is clapping? What is, all of that bring into setting the stage for this poem. And I'm grateful that I'm allowed or was allowed this space, right, in this world to be able to start that conversation and to bring people back to letting that be a relevant moment, even when the news cycle has kind of moved on, that we constantly think about spaces that are communal and that are holy as, have they been invaded, and thinking about the people in those spaces and how we continue to stand up for them.
Mm-hmm.
And since then we've seen quite a few more church bombings, church shootings, unfortunately. And so I hate that it's a trend, but as long as it is, the poem becomes relevant again to continue to have those conversations.
Your facility with words just astounds me, and the fluidity, the melody, the cadence, the rhythm, all of those things that you're able to achieve seemingly so flawlessly. I know obviously you have a God-given talent for this, but I know you also work at it, and it's work and it's study. I understand that. I'm going to transition now to Plum Sugar, because Plum Sugar is an incredible, I think you call it a choreo poem.
Yeah.
That was presented here in Houston just a couple of months ago, the latter part of 2022. It's about the rise of Lauren Anderson, the fierce Black prima ballerina from Houston Ballet, who happens to be a friend of mine and now a friend of yours as well. And you were able to take Lauren's story and tell it in a way that it had not been told before. I've interviewed Lauren many times through the years. First, when I was on the air here at KPRC, and I interviewed her for the podcast a couple of years ago, I think around the time that she might have started working with you. She might have been working with you at that time in the beginning of the interviews. But the show, Plum Sugar, The Rise of Lauren Anderson, is positively brilliant. I went to see it, and I was hanging on every word. And there were so many times when I wanted to be able to get a clicker in my hand and pause and rewind so I could listen to that phrase again. And it was just, before it was over, I knew I was going to go back. And I did. I went back and I took my daughter with me so that she could experience it. And I don't even know what the question is here, because I'm putting all this praise on you, because the way that you were able to take her life story and turn it into a poem along with the choreography was just, I've never seen anything like it before. How did you even envision what this could and ultimately did look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of people haven't seen something like this before, but in the poetry slam and performance poetry communities, a choreo poem is a very familiar form. And so people like Mahogany Browne have done choreo poems as well in New York. Inazaki Shange, right, did For Color Girls, which was kind of the original choreo poem. And so it's something that we all interpret differently, but all kind of figure out a way to use the body and the text together. And so I knew, listening to Lauren's story, I wanted it to sound like me in the text, but there's just no way you can tell a dancer's story and have no dance. I just don't believe that. That's not a thing. Mm-hmm. And so we knew we wanted to incorporate dance. And I started thinking about who has had ownership over Lauren's story. As a celebrity, she's had the media tell her story, and she's had the Houston Ballet tell her story. And, even books, right? Misty Copeland has written about her. But at the end of the day, Lauren hasn't told her story. And I found that one to be the most intriguing. And so putting a character on stage that could just be Lauren's voice and then letting everything else be in dance, for me, sounded like the perfect balance. And I'm so grateful that so many people, the New York Times, right, were able to plug in and really find something valuable in it. Because I think that Lauren has a story that really just pierces your heart and challenges you and makes you want to be a better person and believes in yourself, makes you believe yourself in again, right? Like, I don't know many people who, when they just tell you their life, you feel like you can do better instantaneously, the way that Lauren's life does. And so for me, that was it. I just tapped into that. And then I started thinking through, what does this every scene look like? And how do I balance where the dancers don't get overwhelmed and the actress doesn't get overwhelmed? And we build space for breaths. Those are things I think I didn't master, but really polished my approach in opera of figuring out how not to make someone tired by the end of it, right? How do you give someone a bathroom break? and those are the things I wanted to play with the most. The text for me was easy, right? The story was great already. So it's kind of like, if you have something beautiful to paint, it's pretty easy to make it beautiful,
And when you talk about Lauren being able to tell her own story through your words, I was watching one of your TED Talks online, and you said that one of your favorite quotes is, when your story is being told, make sure you are the one holding the pen.
Absolutely.
And in this case, Lauren was holding the pen simultaneously with you and everyone else who was a part of this really tour de force. And, I'm hopeful that it will live on long beyond what happened here at Stages, because it really needs to be seen. It needs to be seen globally. There's no question about that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And we're doing everything we can to make that a possibility.
Yeah, it's that brilliant and important a story to share. So, my goodness, you're so busy. So you have a new book that is about to come out, about to be released, called Black Chameleon. So give us a little snapshot of that. I believe it's a little bit of a memoir, but not all memoir. It's memoir and myth, and just tell us about it.
Yeah, it's a little crazy, right?
Yeah, it is a little crazy.
It's funny because when I was writing it, I was like, I don't know what this is. And I was like, I'm going to let a publisher decide where this lives on a shelf. I'm just going to write the thing that I like hear in my head and see how it works. So it started off me collecting stories about the women in my family. And my mom had all of these really great, crazy stories about these women that came before me that I never met, but that reacted to things the way that I would react to things. It's kind of like in the DNA, It's the kind of women we are. And so I wanted to collect those stories for my daughter. I wanted to collect those stories for myself. But about halfway through, I realized that the stories weren't enough. It was a journal. It was good, but there was something that didn't move it into being universal. And a friend of mine at the time who was serving as a youth poet laureate, Jackson Neal, asked me to come on their podcast. And the question they posed was, what mythology did you grow up believing? And I struggled. I normally can freestyle an answer or come up with something. But for 2 weeks, I really wrestled with what is the mythology I believe. I mean, yes, of course, I was raised Christian, and that's a kind of mythology. But, if we go back to like the Anansi stories that are prevalent in African culture, I didn't have the American equivalent to that as a Black woman. Mm-hmm. And so I started thinking about, what if I just created it? I'm a writer. So could I just write it? And I thought through, what are the things that seem unbelievable in my life, but I've completely bought into them. And the first one was that my mom has eyes in the back of her head, right?
Oh my God, every Black child. How many times did our mothers say that? How many times, really?
Yeah. And so I just was like, if they have eyes, where did they come from? Why did they keep them? Why would anyone want that? Just like, what was their purpose? And so posing these questions, I came up with a myth on how they came to be and what purpose they serve for Black women, and being kind of all seeing and all knowing in ways that are like a God.
I have to stop you right there, just because. Yeah. So I have an advanced copy of the book, and I have read a good part of it. And that what you're talking about right now, about the women who were blind. And I'm not going to ask you to go into the whole story, because I want people to read the book. But that literally shook me to my core. Mm-hmm. It shook me to my core, because what you did is you wove the history of how we got to this country into this myth that you created. And it's just simply brilliant. It is simply brilliant. And, your facility, again, in using your imagination, but tying it to our history, and then also to how you would like the world to be, I think is just such a gift. It's such a gift. I can't wait to finish the book. What do you want people to take away from it?
I think, the question I kind of posed to myself in writing this was, what do Black women and God have in common? And I think that the answer for me was, they both want to be believed in, and they both want to be believed. And so for me, I want people to leave this seeing Black women. And I don't think that you have to be of any specific race to see us, right? Or any specific background to see us. But I think, especially as we've watched the political and social climate of this country, Black women have been a huge force in shaping and shifting and guiding how we go about having justice and equity, and really being able to make space for all of us to exist equally. And I think that they also, at the same time, are the largest minority in this country, right? We think of the most oppressed people tend to be Black women. And so there's something in being visible, right? There's something in not having to camouflage anymore. There's something in being heard. I want women who read this to feel heard. I want people who don't feel like they are the woman reading this to feel like they can hear better after reading this book. And if that would happen, I think that I would be grateful for that.
Black Chameleon will be available in March. Is that right? Is that when it launches?
March 7th is our drop date. Yep.
March 7th. Okay. And I urge all of you to pick up a copy of it for sure.
And you can pre-order now through Kindred Stories online, which is a good Black-owned bookstore here in Houston, Texas. They have a pre-order link already up, and everyone who buys through that pre-order actually gets an autographed copy of the book. So just a little incentive for you.
Yes. Yeah. And pre-orders, I know, are so important. You mentioned the political chaos that, we're living in. And I know you have 2 children. You have a daughter and a son. When you think about their future and the world that we are leaving them, tell me what those thoughts are.
Oh, goodness. I think for me, I worry. I think all of us worry, right? Things have seemed so in upheaval lately. I asked my mom, because my mom grew up in the 50s in Alabama, right? So she was like in the heart of the civil rights movement. And I asked her, it seems like the world is so tense right now. Has it always been that way? And I've just been kind of naive and blind to it. And now I'm, coming into really my adulthood, I'm starting to understand it. Or have they gotten worse? And she hands down was like, oh, it's gotten so much worse. And I was like, wow, okay, so it's not me being crazy, right? The world is a little nuts. And I just think that I have to pass on to my children resilience. I have to pass on to them their history, right? Unfortunately, with book bannings and curriculum changes, I don't know that anyone is going to teach my children anything about their Black selves, coming forward if it's not me and it's not their community. And so then it's like, well, how do I create that space for them, for other children? I just sold my first children's book in that effort, right? Of how do I write us into history? There's this really great quote by Walter Mosley. He did in his masterclass where he said, if you're not in a country's literature, then you're not in a country's history. And I just truly believe that, like that, then my job becomes as this liaison or this intermediary to write us back into the history of this country. And so that no matter how many times they try to erase us, they just find more and more evidence that we were here. And I think that for my children as well, right, is showing them how to take up all of their space. My son is a strong-willed Black man.
How old are your children?
My children are about to be 6 and 10. And my son, he's started using this phrase, which I absolutely hate and I absolutely love at the same time, which when we ask him why he does the most insane things, he says, Mom, I'm just being me. And there's just something about that kind of acceptance. Like, I'm going to be myself. I don't need to change for anyone. You can think it's crazy, but I'm just going to do me, be me. If he got any bit of that from me, I am so grateful that I left them with that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wow. Because we're always saying, you do you, right? And that's what he's doing. He's being himself. Oh, my goodness. So you mentioned your children's book that you just sold. Do tell. And I know it's called Hush, Hush, Hurricane, right?
It is. I sold to Coquila Books, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. I'm really excited. They're actually the home of Matthew Cherry's Hair Love, which is another book that I absolutely adore.
Oh, beautiful book.
Yeah, beautiful book and beautiful movie, right? All of it. And so Hush Hush Hurricane actually was the idea of my agent. He was like, what if you created a book that was centered in like the hurricane or how to prep for a hurricane? And I was like, yeah, I don't know about that. And then I started playing with the idea and I was like, what I really would prefer is like, what is the bedtime book for a kid in the middle of a hurricane? We go through them so many times and we have to talk our kids down, right? They hear the wind, they hear the storm, they watch the water flood in, they are here with us and they absorb all of that trauma. And if there's a way for me to calm that, and anyway, I would love to be able to write that. And so that's what the book turned into, was kind of this good night book in the middle of the hurricane, when everything is unsure and dangerous and reckless, how do you find a place to put your feet down and to ground yourself in family and love? I think that's what we do as Houstonians, every hurricane season. And so it's a matter of making that thing that I think all of us in the South feel as climate change becomes more inevitable. How do we turn that into something that we can talk our kids through and not shy away from?
That's such a perfect way to approach it. I mean, I was just had a flash of a friend of mine during Hurricane Harvey, holding her newborn, walking across, actually not walking, being rowed in a boat across the street to a neighbor's home because their house had flooded. And you think about the collective trauma of all of the children who went through that, not just Harvey, but as you say, any hurricane or any natural disaster for that matter. With climate change being what it is, it's becoming more and more frequent and something else yet for us to be concerned about as we leave this planet for our children,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I read in your new book, The Black Chameleon, one of the stories that really struck me was the Garden of Hope and the Garden of Fear. Can you encapsulate that story for our audience and kind of help them understand what you were trying to say there?
Yeah, I think in thinking about mythology, I immediately went to the parables of Jesus. And I was like, ooh, I love the form of parable. Like, how come no one writes parables? They're amazing, right? So I was like, I want to create a parable. And I created the parables of the gardeners. And I think for me, it stemmed a lot in kind of how I see our political space right now, right? Is we kind of have two choices. We plant hope and we believe that things can get better, or we just give into this fear that seems to have permeated everything. And that's kind of the two routes people have to reacting right now. And I think that hope is hard. Hope leaves you open for rejection and failure and disappointment. And it takes a long time to see hope turn into something. And I think fear is immediate, right? It grows eternal, right? It is this thing that in one word can spread so violently. And we have to be intentional about choosing to grow hope over choosing to grow fear. And I wanted to wrap that into a story, right? That could kind of have a moral and have its thing behind it, but that would really teach us that lesson that we have to hold on to hope maybe more closely than we ever have. And we need to be intentional about growing it and intentional about how we keep fear out of that hope, but really give into all the things that could be.
It's just it's beautiful, and that's another one. It just struck me because, like you say, fear is so immediate, and it is at the root, I believe, of most of what is going on in this country and actually around the world. It's fear of the other. It's fear of what we don't know or understand and is not like us, and therefore it is wrong, and it is keeping me from getting mine. It feeds into that scarcity mentality.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the reality is there's plenty of room at the table. And if there's not, there's plenty of ways to build another one. Right. And I think that people need to understand that is, you not sitting at my table doesn't mean that you don't eat. It just means we eat separately, or maybe that we eat some food that we never thought we were going to eat together. Right. I have found the most joy in moments of being absolutely lost in other people's culture. As a teacher, I taught in a predominantly Latinx or Latin neighborhood, and having them invite me to quinceañeras and having them be in spaces where I didn't speak anything that they were saying at first, right? I know very little Spanish, and now I know a little bit more, but just being in spaces where I was lost to it were probably some of the most satisfying moments of my life. Mm. And I think that when we can get over the fact that people are different and instead celebrate those differences as kind of like a rainbow, right? It is all the colors. Why not celebrate all of them and have them all to be brilliant and bright and equal, take up their equal space? I think that's how we have to get in this country. But it just seems like such a long road now, and we used to feel like we were getting progress. We used to be able to read about the civil rights movement and feel like we had made gains. And, I'm not saying that there are no gains or that those are all gone, but they just seem to not be as massive as we wanted them to be,
Yeah. And the movement now to roll back a lot of those gains and, move us back 50, 60, 70 years.
Absolutely.
One of the questions that I always ask my guests is, we were just talking about othering and fear of not knowing the other person because they're different. Can you think of a seminal time in your life where you were made to feel like the other, and what that felt like in the moment and how you came out of it and how you use what you learned to show up the way that you do now as this brilliant poet?
There's been so many times I think that I've been the other. From a very young child in class, I started off being homeschooled and then transitioned to public school. And there was a huge divide there to moving to Texas, right? I'm not a native Houstonian, though I am a Houstonian now, right? I claim it as home. But coming from LA or from the LA area and landing in Texas was wildly different. It was a culture shock. And I remember getting on stage one night and they were like, all the way from LA. And everybody just turned to their partner and started to talk. It was like nothing I was going to say was going to be of value because I was not a Texan. And I don't want to say that represents all of the Texans' views, because I think that Texans have a really huge part of my heart. And I think once you're plugged in, there is so much welcoming spirit and hominess right here that I'm not leaving anytime soon. But coming here at first, it was, how do I plug into community? And then once I plugged into community, how do I be a Black woman in a space that's held mostly by men and still find myself in a space where I can be strong and forceful and poignant and intelligent? It's hard to carry all of that. And I think that I've only seen that othering increase, right? In spaces like classical music and opera, where there maybe are 50 people who do what I do in opera that are Black, right? And only maybe half of those are women. Just thinking about that as, always needing to readjust and recalibrate and redirect that what I'm saying is indeed the truth and is indeed how we should be represented. It's hard to take on, but I think someone has to do it. I think we have to kind of put our big girl draws on, right? And figure out how to take up the space, because if we don't, we'll never be there.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my husband and I said to him, I'm scared. I was talking about a project and I said, I'm scared that I'm only being asked to do this because I'm Black and I'm a woman and everyone else on the team is a white man. And I feel like they're just asking me as kind of the diversity hire.
The box. Yeah.
Yeah. And he said to me, it's better to be a fly on the wall than not in the room. And I was like, I hate it. I don't want to be a fly, right? Nobody wants to be a fly that's swatted, but there is something to being in the room. And unfortunately, we're still making firsts.
Yeah.
And we're still breaking boundaries.
You mentioned the work that you're doing in the operatic world. Is this still going on, your residency with the American Lyric Theater in New York City? So tell us a little bit about what that is and how you are making your mark in opera.
Yeah, so American Lyric Theater is probably the largest development program for librettists and composers in the nation. Somehow I got in. No, I mean, I say that, but, jokingly, I got in last year, and that's actually where I met Jasmine Barnes, who you mentioned earlier. And it is a space that, has prior to 2020 been fairly white. I think there's been 2 other Black women who have been part of this organization, and I think they've done about 7 seasons of cycles. So, you think about that we're not always there. And so, it's really been learning and the mastery of what I need to do in the craft and what people have done as librettists prior to me, but then figuring out how do I make Black voices and Black stories live in this space that has been seems so elitist and so removed from normal culture, very classist. People think of opera as like, I get dressed up in my, $1 million fur coat and go to see the opera, when the reality is opera started as street performers, right? Opera started as the common man's theater. And there is something about reclaiming that space that I'm working to do. And Jasmine and I together have been working a lot on doing. And so we're currently working on a full-length opera called She Who Dared, that actually talks about the 7 women who are responsible for desegregating the Montgomery bus system. And we wanted to make sure we weren't just highlighting Rosa Parks, because Rosa Parks is amazing and deserves all her flowers. But there were 6 other women standing right there with her that really put themselves on the line and really worked diligently. I mean, obviously more than 6, but at least 6 that we can name and put our hands on, that we wanted to make, kind of bring up out of the shadows and give them their light and their shine as well. And so I'm working in that space, right, to tell our stories. This is the only opera I've ever seen that the entire cast is Black women. And I'm interested to see how it goes. We did a reading earlier or later last year, and the audience loved it. So I'm hoping we continue that trajectory.
Do you have an idea of when we might expect to see it on stage?
Yeah, so we'll do another workshop, kind of like a Fully Realized with the music workshop in May. And then it'll kind of be open to opera companies to see who wants to take on and develop it further from there.
Wow.
So we have a few prospective partners that we would like to see take it on. But it's just a matter of time to see kind of when it will be in its full thrust.
You are one busy woman. My goodness. So you've got this opera in production. You just got a new book deal for your children's book. Your memoirs coming out in March. You just wrapped up this incredible run with Plum Sugar and working toward making that go beyond Houston. What else do you have on your plate, and what's next? Yeah,
so I have a couple other performances I'm launching this year. I'm doing a collaboration with Loop 38 and composer Martha Horsts, who we're creating something around the Rothko Chapel, kind of a one-night only event in May. And then I have a piece that I'm doing with Kendrick Scott and artist Robert Hodge for DeCamera that we're shining a light on the Sugarland 95, which for people who don't know what that is, there was 95 bodies found in the excavating for a school in Sugarland. And once they did the kind of research on them, found that there were 95 bodies from a convict leasing program. So Black bodies that were kind of just discarded. And so we created a piece called Unearthed, I'll be performing with Harlem String Quartet, forgive me, and in May as well for kind of a one night honoring of the people that we lost. And so that's working. And then the book tour, right? It's just blossoming every day, from book festivals to a European tour that I'm currently working on booking out. So I'll be in Germany and Austria in the summer. So it is a busy life, but I am blessed, booked, and busy. You know, I every moment that I'm like, I am tired, I am so grateful to be the kind of tired that I am, because as an artist, none of this is guaranteed, you know, and I'm just so grateful. I really am so grateful to God that I'm in a position where I can make my art let me eat, you know, and give me opportunities to travel the world and to have great, meaningful conversations and learn more cultures. I'm just excited.
I am so excited for you, and you are so deserving of everything that is coming your way, and you are just getting started. I can't wait. I completely agree with Jasmine. You are going to be famous. Don't forget the little people. Don't forget us who knew you back when. All your Houston homies, right?
For sure.
Okay, so now we're going to switch it up, and you get to ask me a question.
So I was watching, you know, I've been thinking of what my question is going to be. I was watching the interview between Oprah and Quinta Brunson. I don't know if you saw it, but their one-on-one sit down.
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, so it's really good. I mean, it's Oprah. It's not going to be bad, right?
Of course it's good. Of course it's good.
But I found really interesting that both of those women said that they have never experienced imposter syndrome. And I was like, wow, really? Because I experience it all the time. So my question for you is, have you ever experienced imposter syndrome? And if so, how do you move through or navigate that space?
Totally, yes. 100%. I think that moving through that and really moving through any challenge is there are a couple of things. One would be reminding yourself that you are worthy, that you deserve to be there, that you have done the work, that you know what you're doing, even though sometimes you think you don't, but you really do. I mean, it's like you have to talk to yourself. It's like affirmations.
Yeah.
It's an affirming of your being, your work ethic, your passion for what you do. I absolutely have had moments where I have felt like, okay, I've got them fooled now. And one of these days they're going to figure out that I'm not really all that smart. I'm not really all that. But then I think part of that comes from growing up being told not to be braggadocious. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And I think that's, especially young girls are, don't toot your own horn. Don't think you're all that. But I think there's a fine line between doing that and being that obnoxious person that says, hey, I got it going on, and just having confidence in who you are as a human being and the gifts that you bring to the world. So as I have grown through adulthood, I've been able to get rid of that part of my voice that says I'm bragging and embrace the part that says I'm embracing who I am and I'm standing in it and I'm feeling good about it and I'm sharing it and I'm proud of what I have to offer the world. Yeah. So it's not making excuses. And I think the other part of it, aside from affirming to yourself that you belong, is just getting out of bed and taking the next best step. Whatever that is on that particular day, but just moving forward, even if it's just an inch at a time. And sometimes it feels like that. Yeah. But not giving up, not standing still or moving backward, just taking the next best step. Yeah. That's how I've gotten through it and still do, to this day with whatever challenges are coming my way.
I love that. I'm like making my little notes over here from you.
Oh my goodness. And that's a great question. I haven't been asked that question ever.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I'm going to go watch that interview with Oprah and Quinta.
Yeah, I was like, you've never? I was like, I feel now so outlier, right? Like such an outsider
well,
now because
I love them. I love them both, and God bless them for never having been there.
Yeah.
That's a very strong place to be. But we all walk our own path, and the one that you are walking, my dear, is I can't even wait to see where it's going to lead, and just promise that you will come back and share more with our audience as the sky opens up for you, as I know it will.
I absolutely, as long as you have a welcoming mat out for me, I'm always going to walk through the door.
It is most definitely always going to be there for you. Thank you so much, Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton. You are deep. You are deep, deep, deep.
Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Didn't I tell you why you need to remember her name? Well, now you get it. Deborah D.E.E.P. Mouton. What an inspiration. As always, we will link to everything that Deborah's got going on, which is obviously a lot, in the show notes. So just go there to find all the links, and then be sure to join us again next time for another edition of Our Voices Matter Across the Generations. Thanks again, everybody. Take care.